talk to us a little bit about your professional background. I understand from one of our previous conversations that you were part of the industry. So what is it that you did in terms of work, and how did the learnings and the lessons from that experience apply to what you do now?
So I'll answer the second question first. They apply in the same way. But to get into it, started off, I've always been fascinated by business and numbers. So studied finance and accounting. I worked as an auditor, worked in corporate finance. I went back to business school because I wanted to switch to management and marketing. I thought it was more interesting and I would get to be more in control. I like being in control. Worked with a CPG firm. So that's consumer
packaged
goods, and learned a lot about how to develop a product and also to get consumers to buy it. And I've always been fascinated by human psychology, that how do stupid people do very well, and why do people with high IQs do pretty terribly? I've always been fascinated by that. So there's a lot of psychology involved in marketing as well. There's a lot of research involved. You find out what the consumer likes, and then you package your product in the way the consumer likes. That's a very simplistic definition. You promise the consumer benefits. You look more handsome. You'll be more beautiful. You'll have more sex. You'll have more money. You'll live a good life. You'll be happy. You don't say that overtly, but that's what all the imagery and that's what all the words do, right? And then people buy it. So after that experience, I set up my own business, which was how to use airline miles and hotel points to travel.
Mm-hmm.
I like being my own boss. It's hard to find a better boss than me. Sold that business, and I was trying to figure out what my next thing to do was. I was doing a lot of reading, a lot of internal introspection. And I want to offer that spirituality has a very superstitious definition, but I think true spirituality is just science of the inward insight. So just like in science, you have an observation, a hypothesis, and then you try and invalidate it to see if it works and how it works elsewhere. Spirituality is the same thing. Why am I thinking the way? Come up with a hypothesis, see what it works, and be very honest that this is what it is. An example would be, I love animals, but then if I'm killing them, that hypothesis is very clearly invalidated, right?
Yeah, it's null and void.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's all spirituality is, science of the insight and being honest in a scientific way. So I was doing more of that, investigating Vedanta, so people like Ramana Maharishi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, and came across veganism. So after I watched Dominion, I said, this is, let me do more research into it. I was curious about the health aspects, and I found that, wow, there's no argument against veganism when it comes in terms of health. It actually enhances health.
Right.
And then when I did that for the environment, it was the same thing, that the planet would be less close to destruction if everyone didn't abuse and eat animals, right? So then I said, wow, this is very strange. Why is this being kept quiet? Because there's the ethics, there's the health, and there's the environment. And in all these avenues, it makes no sense why people are not talking about it. So I said, well, let me see what I can do. So that's, having worked in industry, you can use the same techniques to promote something. And I think you used this, I know you did earlier in our conversation. You said there was a blade at the Vipassana, which was a knife, and there's a scissor at the end, right? And what I want to invite people to consider is that the object does not matter. It's the use you put the object to.
Right.
And that use and the use you will put it to depends on the cleanliness of your mind. So if your mind has got trash from society and what you've imbibed, of course, you're going to use the implement in the most disgusting way. But if you've cleared up your mind, you've done the work, you're honest, you'll use that tool in a very good way. So you can use the same skills that you can use to push harmful products like, say, colas and sugary drinks and salty products. You can use that same skill set to promote changes that are positive to animals, that involve rising to the highest point of your consciousness versus living in the gutter.
Talk to us about your journey. And Faraz has mentioned that he was growing up in Iran, and he was exposed to the idea of vegetarianism, and then when he was in the US about veganism. What was your journey like?
I grew up in India and I ate a lot of meat growing up. I actually worked for an animal welfare group in India, and we used to help stray dogs and stray cats. And one of the first introductions to veganism was a guy who used to work there. He said, "How come you save dogs and cats, but you eat other animals?" And then he was actually vegan. So there are a lot of vegetarians in India, but he was vegan in that he wouldn't eat eggs and milk as well. So I thought it was pretty stupid. That was a pretty stupid thing to say, but I tried it, but I couldn't go more than 2 or 3 days. I guess at that point, it wasn't particularly important to me. My selfish pleasure overruled any potential care I had for the animals. Maybe about 7 years ago in the US, I went for a silent Vipassana 10-day meditation camp. And there was only vegetarian food over there. And that was the longest I'd gone without meat. And even though I had withdrawal symptoms, I think on day 2 and 3, I managed to make it through 10 days. And I said, well, if I've done it for 10 days, I'm going to just continue indefinitely because I've always wanted to do this.
Yeah.
That was how I got started with vegetarianism. But it was kind of a cheat vegetarianism because I had milk and I added on eggs, which they don't do in India because I like the taste of eggs and I didn't really want to give them up. I would tell myself stuff like, oh, it's no one's dying for them. The eggs are going to be useless. But I didn't really go deep into it because I didn't want to change my diet too much. In 2020, so around the lockdown time, I stumbled across Dominion, the documentary Dominion, and I watched it and I was shocked at what happens to animals, including milk and eggs. And I started crying after that. And I cut up all my woolen clothes and I said, this is it, I'm done. So it was immediate like that, but it took me over 40 years to get to that point.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And you spoke about personal pleasure, right? And sensorial pleasure, how we like things that are tasty and we're not willing to give them up. But then Vipassana involves sacrifice, which is you're sacrificing your desire to speak. There's abstinence, and you're abstaining from all of those things. And the context was vegetarian diet. You mentioned withdrawal symptoms. Talk to us a little bit about what was that withdrawal? Was it physical in nature? Was it psychological? Did you find yourself not speaking but thinking about meat?
To go back to sacrifice, I think oftentimes when we think of sacrifice, we think of it giving up. But the real meaning of a sacrifice is that I give up something small to get something much larger, right? So I just want to make that very clear for the viewers that when we talk about sacrifice, it's not something that deprives us. It's something that actually enhances our life and our level of consciousness. To go back to the withdrawal symptoms, on day 2 and 3, I was thinking a lot about meat. And this was at a ranch in Texas, and I could hear cows, and I actually had visions of going up and slaughtering a cow myself and eating it. It was that intense for me. But they kind of waned and pretty much disappeared by the end of the 10 days.
That is interesting. So, that's a really fascinating visual of withdrawal symptom, where you're actually considering the stimulus is hearing an animal's voice and you're considering slaughtering them.
Yeah, I'd seen knives in the kitchen and I'd even planned out which knife I was going to use and what time I was going to go.
That is so interesting.
So I guess it just goes to show that when we're addicted to something, we'll do anything initially to get it. And then we realize that we don't really need it. And then it just disappears. I think for me also, after watching Dominion, I came in contact with the Prashant Advait Foundation. And he talks a lot about veganism. And it really resonated with me that and this is what a lot of other people, everyone from Gandhi to Tolstoy have said, that if I think of myself as loving and compassionate and kind, but I'm willing to kill an innocent, defenseless creature, watch the life leave its eyes, watch the blood trickle out of its neck, watch it convulse and shake, scream in terror, just because I like the taste of it, I'm not really loving, kind, and honest. And that's the game of the ego. The ego likes thinking one thing, but its actions are very different. And when you show it a true mirror, it gets very, very defensive and scared.
So when you watched Dominion, did that ego defensiveness arise in you?
I think at that point, it was so in my face and compelling that it would have taken a lot of internal dishonesty to disregard it at that point. But I don't think it's specific to Dominion. I think it's specific to the individual. That I think at that point I was a lot more open and had explored a lot more. And I was willing to, I would say, be more spiritual. And I would define spiritual not as lighting candles and doing fake yoga and all that stuff that goes on in the name of spirituality, tarot cards and good vibes and past life regression and all the pseudoscientific superstition. But spirituality at its very essence is not lying to myself and being honest about thoughts, emotions, feelings, and how I'm living my life. It's in essence, don't be stupid and be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that gave me enough evidence where it would take in a lot of closing my eyes, which I'd done for 40 years before. And I decided I didn't want to do it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. So your perspective on spirituality is intimately linked to authenticity, honesty, and to look at yourself and see if there is stimuli such as Dominion that's sort of provoking or evoking that honest internal discussion that you needed to have. And you mentioned that you actually tore up your woolen clothing. So there was something about that stimulus that presented, that was presented very compellingly to you, and it moved you to action such as that. And what I'm holding in front of me is, on one hand, when you were going through the Vipassana, you had this really visual urge of, picking up the knives, selecting the knife, and then going and slaughtering the animal for your own personal pleasure, to being moved to this, to picking up a pair of scissors, and both of these are weapons in a way, right? So blades are involved. And I'm kind of like getting into a little bit of a Jungian, slant here, but it's really interesting that you were moved so much at that point in time to do that. What do you think was going on in your mind at that point in time? What was that conversation like? And I think it's really important for our viewers to sort of learn from these references and these journeys and these stories, because we are, in fact, as human beings, sometimes designed to shut down that internal voice and to uphold whatever society tells us, whatever templates tell us.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's
so give us an insight into
absolutely.
What was going on.
So as human beings, what differentiates us from other animals is that we have the faculty of choice, right? So a lion kills for its dinner and it eats other animals. A cow grazes on grass. That doesn't make the cow better than the lion because the cow does not eat meat. It just programmed that way, right? But for humans, we actually have the choice. Do I want to kill another animal, or do I want to eat the food that does not involve killing? So that differentiates us. But as you point out, as human beings, one, we're born with a lot of tendencies, right? So the child cries, the child grabs, the child wants toys, right? And these get worse as we get conditioned. So we get conditioned with the family, we get conditioned with the religion, we get conditioned with the society, we get conditioned with what's around us, right? So these innate tendencies that are destructive get compounded, right? And as they say, wisdom is not adding more, it's taking off, right? It's unlearning. And that's what we have to do as adults, question everything, rigorous questioning, rigorous examination. To me, that is the heart of spirituality. It's not doing this and thinking that you're a yogi and then saying, hey, let's go out for chicken.
Yeah.
That's just boga. There's nothing
it's really
sacred about it.
Yeah, it's really about walking your walk and talking your talk.
Mm-hmm.
And back to what Faraz was initially saying, that it's not just about being honest to yourself, but also not keeping quiet, not choosing silence at that point in time. And also I've heard, there's this big thing around the V word is so loaded. We shouldn't talk about it. We should, sort of sugarcoat it and maybe say plant-based and add that little slant so that, we're seen as polite and not
Absolutely
as militant.
not. And just to add another angle to this, you're probably familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, right? So I think the most important thing in the Bhagavad Gita is that Krishna is telling Arjun, who's reluctant to fight. The whole book is a discourse of how he's trying to convince Arjun to fight. And Arjun says, well, what about the women? What about society? He's my uncle. I sat on his lap. He's using every excuse not to fight. And Krishna is trying to convince him, saying, oh, you look like a coward. Oh, you look like this. You've got to fight, right? And as they say, when you have to fight the right battle, and not fighting it is as bad as fighting the wrong battle.
Yeah.
So when it's time to fight, fight.